Okay, hi everybody. I'm going to be your host today for the conference. We're just going to let everybody in slowly and get started in about a minute. So thanks for joining, and yeah, very soon we'll be starting. Cool. Okay, so we're a minute in. I think we're just going to get right to it. So thanks so much everybody for joining today. This is our first round of talks, and this group is called Looking Out. My name's Laura Holleran, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm your host today. So I'm just going to describe myself here. So I'm a white woman with brown hair, wearing a black shirt, kind of a chaotic apartment in the background, kitchen on the right, couch on the left. And before I get into the rest of our agenda, I'm going to just start by doing a land acknowledgement. And today I'm going to share the words of Deirdre Lee from her digital land acknowledgement piece titled Existing as a Settler on Unceded Land, a Guide. So Deirdre lives in Mi'kma'ki, which is where I'm also currently living, which is into the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. And more specifically, I'm in Chibuktuk, which is in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So step one, read this poem aloud, ideally outside in the sun, so when the trees and the wind can listen in. If this makes you roll your eyes, stop, go away, have a nap, try again. Step two, learn what unceded means. Understand that this is just the beginning. Step three, be present with feelings of being uncomfortable or embarrassed. You could probably use the practice, realizing these feelings are not life-threatening. Step four, locate yourself, specifically, geographically, time for Q&A, time to know, time to say, whose traditional territory do you live and breathe and work and love upon? Who is here for thousands of years before you? Step five, recognize that though Indigenous people are ancient, we are also still alive. Resist the urge to mythologize, reject what little, if anything, you have been taught in school or in most mainstream media. Embrace this truth. You have no idea. Step six, it is not your job to fix this, or it is, but as an accomplice, you are not the boss. No matter your activist street cred, in this, you are a rookie. Let go of an expectation of being in charge, of being lauded, of getting an ally cookie. Step seven, 7 generations, 7 teachings, 7 months to 70, 1752 treaty, elders and youth are rising, are speaking. Are you listening? Are you learning? Step 8, infinity. Place yourself on this journey. This is not an on-off switch. This is no magic spell scenario. This is more like encouraging plants to grow. Nurture your skills and heart. Absorb, process, try, fuck up, rest, restart. Step 9. This guide is not permanent or definitive or chronological. There is no such thing as linear time. This work does not come with finish line. Okay, so welcome to the talks. Really hope you've had a chance to watch the conference opener that came out yesterday. Hopefully you're also part of the Slack channel. Today we're going to be going through our first 3 talks, and those have been pre-recorded by our speakers. Each speaker is going to be answering your questions, and there's 2 ways that's going to unfold. So there's a Q&A tab in Zoom where you can be typing out your questions, and speakers will either be typing their answers back to you, but they're also going to be picking a few to respond to live at the end of all the talks today. So the videos have been captioned to ensure there's or captioned by people to hopefully make them as precise as possible. But we're going to be using auto captioning for the Q&A portion when the recorded videos are playing. And so for you to turn on your captions on Zoom, there should be a menu option with 3 little dots that you can access, and that you can get your captions and transcripts there. We're also going to be providing a link to the pre-recorded videos on YouTube, so that if you want to set up your settings to watch the talks in whatever way works for you, you can do that. And Claudia is going to send that link in our chat right now. Another thing I want to get into before we get to the talks is just our code of conduct. So, you know, when you're asking any questions or engaging with people on Slack, we really want to remind you just that we're really dedicated to making sure our online space is harassment-free for everybody, regardless of gender, gender identity, age, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, religion, or lack thereof. So we're really not tolerating any kind of harassment in any form. And anybody kind of breaking those rules will just be removed from the conference and not refunded. Okay, so lots of stuff just covered there, but now we get to jump into the talks. So to get started, we've titled this session Looking Out, and that's really to speak to the notion that this group of talks is really describing learning from other disciplines and about how we can deliver more inclusive design and research practices. And our first talk is going to be 23 minutes, and it's by Garima, and her talk is titled Developing Trauma-Informed Practice in with for Design. So Garima is a South Asian woman in her early 30s. She has dark blonde hair. She's wearing a gray linen shirt, pink glasses, and earphones. And she's sitting in a room with a white wall behind her. And Claudia is our person behind the camera kind of action vibe. So she's going to start the talk.
And ancestral territories of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations in west coast of Canada. The topic of my talk today is developing trauma-informed practices in, with, for design. I will start this conversation by telling you that I have been conducting so many design research workshops in the last couple of years, facilitating workshops and practicing in different conversations about researching in health and service design. The notion of trauma-informed care practices have started to show up pretty consistently. In my second life, I also work as an outreach worker. I've been doing that for many years, very part-time now, but we support homeless clients living with multiple barriers and health challenges in Vancouver. I've started to think about how carefully and considered at first, but now quite second nature, my interactions with my clients are in non-research settings. I've noticed how these subtle methods of interaction and interpersonal dynamics show up so frequently in the way that I conduct research in design spaces as well. I remember watching a video of myself facilitating a research workshop with a group of people living with dementia in a care home. I saw that my voice had changed. I spoke slower, softer, slightly more melodic. My body language was different, attentive, responsive. And that's not just me. I've witnessed my design research colleagues do the same in other workshop settings. How we embody the power dynamics occurring in design research situations and unconsciously and consciously take up or renounce space is quite fascinating. So this is where I begin my talk today. I will tell you a story of one workshop, which is a part of a larger project. I see this as a story because the ideas that I present today are not formalized. They're just explorations and a recounting of a set of experiences. In the story, I touch upon experiences of trauma and consider how re-traumatization in design research process can be proactively mitigated, paying close attention to how we set the scene for research and ask certain questions that might otherwise be triggering, trigger traumatic memories or traumatic responses. I've been looking at workshops and works of various different designers from all over, including Rachael, Sada Fatahala, and Jack Sweshler, who are looking to incorporate trauma-informed practices in design research. I've also been exploring authors that are developing strategies of emergence, relationality, and joy as a way to build resilience and a way to push through trauma. The workshop that I talk about today is a part of a larger master's thesis that explores resilient and relational services. As mentioned before, I worked as an outreach worker for a small organization that is a branch of the City of Vancouver's homelessness services. I chose to begin my master's exploration by researching with my colleagues at this very unique organization. This organization has radical roots in its origin story, but it is slowly shifting due to changing scope of the program and burgeoning systemic challenges, especially relating to the housing and opioid crisis as experienced in Vancouver. As I embarked on this research, I explored the question, how do staff in this particular organization relate to the systems within which they work? And how do relational connections come into play in how they navigate systemic hurdles and challenges? As a design researcher, I was to use design research methods to learn from my colleagues in hopes to incorporate their experiences to a larger relational service design framework. I started my exploration in a very informal way. This is workshop 1, or even maybe before workshop 1. I invited some of my colleagues to a facilitated workshop over beers. In the workshop, I asked them to understand systems that they are a part of from a permaculture lens. I asked them to describe relationships they most rely on, considering these interactions as interconnected and relational nodes, rather than viewing them in isolation. We were expressing some heavy experiences through natural metaphors, and the whole experience felt very cathartic. As such, I decided to take a version of this very workshop to my entire office, to involve all of my colleagues in the office to participate in this type of conversation. Through this workshop, I was not only hoping to highlight relational resilience practiced by frontline workers in complex systemic challenges and how this can be modeled in other service settings, I was also hoping in some way to impart some shift in organizational practices in this workplace towards non-hierarchical participation in order to make people feel like they're being heard and their voices and experiences matter. This is sort of a dual agenda, and it stemmed from a basic assumption that design research that on the one hand is meant to generate knowledge most likely to develop interventions or outcomes. This process of knowledge making also has an ontological impact. The methods that we introduce changes the setting, infuses new values and ways of being. Even if the effect, the taste of being in conversation with each other through sharing embodied knowledge maybe might only last a short while. I got 2 of my managers on board to conduct these workshops as a way to do my research and to introduce new and cathartic set of activities to the group, my colleagues, that gave them a space to share and be heard. So these would be 3 to 4 workshops that would take place at the office right after work. To give you context about this workplace, this office services an average of 110 people every day who come in with all sorts of very complex problems and are served by about 8 to 9 people in a 7-hour workday. This is high stress and a very fast-paced work environment. Change, intentional or unintentional, is a feat to contend with when working and exploring with groups of people or communities that have or continue to live with traumatic experiences. Here, I was about to talk about systems change with a group of people that are having to mitigate trauma of all of their clients that walk into their office every day while managing their own experiences with firsthand or secondhand trauma inside and outside of the workplace while navigating many systemic constraints day in and day out. I won't talk too much about the proceedings of the actual research work, but instead focus on everything that led up to the workshops themselves from a trauma-informed lens to illustrate some successes and, let's say, things that could have been done better. So the first workshop took place on a summer Wednesday. I was walking towards the office with my roll of paper and my craft supplies for the workshop when I noticed a group of people were huddled outside of the front door, resuscitating an overdose victim. 2 of my colleagues were the first responders. It was a pretty intense situation to walk into. Ambulance soon showed up and the victim awoke. It was all fine, but this sort of set the stage for the workshop that took place. I walked into the office after the event and I tried my best to check in with everyone, to check in and suss out the situation and make sure that all my colleagues were still comfortable going through the workshop. They all seemed to have a smile on their faces, and it goes to show the incredible resilience of this group. So then I set up 3 big tables with my classic deck of facilitation cards while my colleagues were wrapping up their day. When one of my colleagues showed up to my table to watch what I was doing and how I was setting up, she picked up the cards and she instantly panicked. She expressed how uncomfortable she felt that she had to participate in this workshop, and that she felt that she was being forced to participate, and that this would probably not end very well. I hadn't even done an introduction at that point. No consent was acquired. I was just setting up the tables in the interest of time, but even the setting of the table became a trigger. After a long conversation with this colleague to express my intention for the workshop, I explained to her that my questions are positive and focus on supportive relational experiences. The methods are playful, and that her consent can be revoked anytime. This conversation was consent making through dialogue. She finally felt at ease. I truly believe that the ease came from the fact that she is my colleague and we had established rapport for years. There was implicit trust in our relationship that needed to be reinstated in that moment, made to feel overt. The process of acquiring consent from the larger group was much quicker. People barely read the consent. Some didn't feel the need to even sign the consent. Some laughed at it, calling it silly and academic. It was pretty apparent that everyone had a different response to this whole process. To start this workshop then, we broke up into 3 groups and set out to ask the questions I had developed. While there were technically facilitators who were the 2 managers, I tried my best to disrupt any hierarchical dynamics. I made sure to spread out pens and paper, post-it notes, and supplies so everyone felt like they could write and participate actively in the conversation. They had access to materials to express themselves equally. The questions were posed in a set of cards, and people were asked to go around to pick the next card to explore all the questions together. The fast-paced nature of the workshop, though, prevented some of these things to go smoothly, however, and facilitators had to take the lead, which reinstated some of those hierarchies again. We finally started the workshop. The first set of questions asked about the systemic constraints that the staff of this organization are consistently working within. To mitigate the stress of talking about systemic breakdowns and the traumatic impact that it has on people on a day-to-day basis, I asked the question abstractly, asking them to describe these systems by creating patterns, diagrams, doodles, and sculptures. We were able to talk through some heavy experiences and concepts by abstracting these ideas to remove the pressure and to, in a way, remove ourselves from these stories. One of my colleagues created a game out of Play-Doh, a game where you have to jump through all of these different hoops and bumps. And it's a game where no one really wins. The image on the screen shows that game. One described the system as a broken ladder, and another person described the system as a slow-moving glacier. For those who didn't feel like expressing themselves through conversation, they were able to share through drawing and making self-sculptures with Play-Doh and anything else. One of my colleagues found herself drawing her dog overlooking a sunset. She finally ended up speaking about the dog as the most significant success story of the organization. He was rescued from a homeless client about 8 years ago, and now he's living a thriving life. He's our office dog and has brought the workers and clients so much joy. That's the dog on the screen. The next questions focused on relationality, interdependence, and collaboration. Quoting Adrienne Marie Brown, who says, "What you pay attention to grows." In this line of questions, I wanted to pay attention to, and in effect, grow the relationality that is experienced by my colleagues in this highly stressful work setting in order to reassert the resilience that they practice every single day by being in collaboration and being in relationship of supports with each other. Some really beautiful conversations emerged in this workshop. My colleague who felt most uncomfortable in the beginning of the workshop happened to be the most participatory and insightful in my group. That truly felt like a success. One of the most significant lessons that I learned through this workshop while building a trauma-informed practice is to be considerate of the notion of change. As I mentioned before, I went into this research with an intention to learn and generate mutual knowledge, but also to impact change. My incredible research supervisor reminded me about the notion of change fatigue. Consider the relationship between trauma and change fatigue. When immersed in situations that are constantly in flux, when we consistently feel like we are standing on tenuous ground, more change, any kind of change, can be really scary. As designers and design researchers, we walk into spaces and inevitably take up roles as change makers. We introduce, we innovate, disrupt, shift, generate, cause, create, etc. Change is implied, but we don't consider the impact that this implicit or overt intention to change can have through the process of researching and designing. In my example, change fatigue showed up in two very distinct ways. People were asking questions, the persisting question of why are we asking these questions? What is the purpose of this? Nothing ever actually changes. Or just the general fear of change was palpable, that these conversations would somehow open up a can of worms and something will inevitably go wrong and we will not know how to manage the explosion that will follow. It's a very dire sort of fear around any kind of change. This sentiment was expressed in earlier conversations with my colleagues prior to the actual workshop. To me, this fatigue and fear of disruption comes from systemic trauma and collective trauma, especially in frontline settings. It's a product of being entrenched in systems that gives us no room to breathe. Instability, unpredictability, and precariousness is conflated with the notion of change. Change becomes pretty scary. So I will leave you with a question. How do we as design researchers manage this change fatigue that comes from working with complex and constrained systems and institutions and all of the associated trauma that comes with it? Especially when robust design research tends to start with context mapping to understand participant and research partners' relationship to institutions and systems that inform their interactions with designed artifacts. For now, I will just summarize the lessons that I have learned from this workshop. The lessons are checking in and checking in again. It's fostering safety through curated spaces and physical artifacts. It's acquiring consent through dialogue and rapport building. It's recognizing that research partners and participants all have diverse needs, and that disrupting hierarchies might be the best place to start. And that maybe we should leave lots of time to take the process slow. And as a method, using abstraction can really prevent retriggering of trauma. And multiple methods of expression can allow full embodied sharing of knowledge. Finally, the most important is to focus on what we wish to see grow, paying attention to the things that we want to envision in the future. To end this conversation, to end this talk, I want to bring attention to trauma from an intersectional perspective. From these workshops, I have learned to see trauma from an intersectional perspective, recognizing that types and levels of trauma impact the sense of agency held by different people, which thus informs power dynamics in a relational process. This very important idea comes from an article that I read recently, Moving Towards a More Inclusive Patient Public Involvement in Health Research Paradigm, the Incorporation of a Trauma-Informed Intersectional Analysis. From these authors' perspectives, addressing power differentials in research is central and critical to establishing a more trauma-informed practice. The authors assert that addressing power dynamics can happen through discursive reflexivity or discursive reflexive practices. The author says that through discourse and dialogue and through reflexivity, which can acknowledge the importance of power at the micro level of the self and our relationships with others, as well as the macro levels of society. It recognizes the multiple truths and diversity of perspectives while giving extra space to voices typically excluded from expert roles. This is really what I had set out to do in these participatory workshops. Engage in a process of discursive reflexivity as a way to address power differentials and develop a trauma-informed practice by being deeply considerate of embodied experiences, which the author also describes as embodied reflexivity. Embodied reflexivity is being intentional about how we physically interact with each other and take up space in the environment of research. Considering how researchers' physical presence and performance influences participants and partners, and how research partners, collaborators, participants' capacity to interact with the environment and pre-existing relationships to the environment impacts the entire engagement process. Reflexivity in general is about committing to ongoing dialogue, as these authors assert. And it's about all agents in a research questioning our assumptions throughout, questioning dominant epistemological frameworks, identifying who holds agency and voice and who is excluded. We can begin with those who are we can begin by recognizing those who are historically excluded from research processes, either because of intentional exclusion or unintended exclusion due to perpetuated trauma that shows up in hostile spaces for contribution, research, and learning. The goal then of trauma-informed practices in research is to make intentional space for different voices to ensure that these voices are well represented in the outcomes that come from research and design. I promised to present one other case study, not realizing how valuable this particular experience has been, but rest assured that these lessons are being intentionally adopted into various other research and design projects, and I hope to share those with you at a later time. For now, thank you so much for joining and looking forward to the discussion that will follow.
Out the captions, especially for the Q&A portion, and Claudia's doing what she can in the background to get that stood up. And also just want to encourage people to post questions in the Q&A portion. We'll be here to answer those. So up next is our second talk, and that is by Lee Dale. His talk's titled, "There's no average person, why designing with intersectionality in mind is critical." So Lee's a white man in his 40s with short brown hair and a light beard. He's wearing a dark gray button-down shirt and sitting in an open concept office in his video. And it's about a 31-minute talk, so enjoy.
I'm Lee. Today I'm going to talk to you about why it's critical to design with intersectionality in mind. At the heart of this is the importance of understanding that there is no average person. More importantly, already diverse markets are becoming increasingly diverse. That's where intersectional approaches come in, and inclusive design offers a tool set for delivering products and services that better serve diverse markets. So let's talk about the people who make up the markets we serve. Here's a photo of a wedding party gathered outside for a big group photo. In fact, This is a photo of me on my wedding day, just 2 years ago. Among this collection of family and friends are people who currently live in Canada, the United States, and various countries across the UK and Africa. It's fair to say that the majority of the people in this photo are first or second generation immigrants in their current countries of residence. These are global citizens, immigrants, mixed races and cultures, all in one family and friend group. My personal anecdote aside, this is happening increasingly so. Let's look at the data. Over the past 50 years, we've seen increasing diversity across North America and beyond. In North America, interracial marriage has increased 3 times since the 1970s, with about 20% of the annual marriages in the US now being interracial or interethnic. This trend, along with accelerating intercultural and interfaith relationships, is continuing to dissolve long-standing barriers between people from different backgrounds. Over the same 50-year period, the world has seen migrants grow from 2.3% to 3.5% of the world's population, approaching 300 million people. The growth of urban centers continues to bring people of all backgrounds together into diverse cities. In Canada, the vast majority of people have moved from sparse, homogeneous rural areas to dense and diverse urban areas over the past 150 years. While more recent reports have also shown that rural areas are becoming more and more diverse. While these relatively recent trends highlight how markets are becoming increasingly diverse, it's important to acknowledge that markets have long been diverse. The issue lies in how we've served those markets. Researchers, strategists, marketers, designers, developers, engineers, and business leaders have simply done a profoundly exceptional job of ignoring market diversity. It's only recently that we've begun to collectively acknowledge these and other factors, including social, behavioral, and technology-driven factors that must lead us to reevaluate how we work, how we deliver products and services. For me, this understanding of shifting markets has led to twin passions of digital excellence and inclusive maturity. Together, digital excellence and inclusive maturity lead to transformative change, both within organizations and across the markets they serve. So let's unpack digital excellence and the 3 core values of inclusivity that together make for a very special combination. For me, not unlike the joyful combination of peanut butter and chocolate. Digital excellence is designed to support the following 3 organizational objectives. The first objective that builds towards digital excellence is an effort to level up a team's digital and technical knowledge and decision-making. I often talk to organizational leaders who recognize the need to bring technology to their work in order to improve customer experience, reduce labor, or increase data intelligence and accelerate decision-making. But when these efforts are nascent within an organization and the people responsible have limited experience with technology, this can result in very expensive decisions that negatively impact the organization. Ultimately, investing in the wrong technology channels or processes can cost more than doing nothing at all. But organizations must embrace digital to succeed today. So the second factor that builds towards digital excellence is to develop realistic, actionable, and impactful next steps for both the immediate and long term. This is about understanding cost, capability to deliver, and impact in order to prioritize the most effective technology, product, and service decisions, while also defining a roadmap based on both immediate and incremental steps towards profound organizational change. Too often, existing services are left to languish while large technology products are undertaken or projects are undertaken, often unsuccessfully. Incremental change and continuous improvement is that essential aspect of digital excellence. That's why the third priority in building towards digital excellence is ensuring product and service feedback loops are in place. From a strategic point of view, setting objectives and key results with related key performance indicators offers an organizational-wide set of standards to measure efforts and outcomes. It's the translation of these measurements to ongoing iteration that becomes critical to continued success. Now, underlying these pillars of digital excellence are three core values that I believe are essential to all of our everyday work. Usability, which is ensuring a frictionless, engaging, and delightful experience. Accessibility, which ensures no one is excluded from being served by your organization or prevented from engaging with your content. And inclusivity, which means developing practices that authentically welcome key market segments who may traditionally have been ignored to engage meaningfully with your organization. So why am I focusing on digital excellence, the growth of digital maturity, and the core values of usability, accessibility, and inclusivity? It's because the research and projects I've worked on over the past decade plus have highlighted the value of these considerations over other approaches. In fact, let's take a look at the ROI of these values. Usability increases conversions and builds brand advocates. Usability includes performance improvements, ease of use, reducing complexity, and increasing automation. Accessibility removes barriers that prevent access to your organization's products, services, and content. Accessibility does take work, and it can take more time up front. However, it's far easier and more effective to bake accessibility into your processes from the beginning rather than attempt to retrofit a product or service that was developed without accessibility in mind. A product or service designed for the average consumer costs more over time and usually becomes unmanageable because you eventually reach the limits of the shortcuts that come into play when you're designing for an average that simply doesn't exist. Meanwhile, an inclusive project can have a slightly higher upfront investment, but it delivers more value immediately and continues to deliver value over time without the challenges of retrofitting and refactoring due to unforeseen or unplanned requirements. Despite the impact and longevity of inclusive over average, as an industry, we are failing to deliver on mandates that improve products and services for everyone. Looking at websites alone as a lens, in an automated review of the top 1 million websites, WebAIM found that 98.1% of homepages had accessibility failures. In my day-to-day work, I've only seen websites that approach accessibility, all with gaps. About 10% of those sites are workable, whereby they can be retrofitted to meet objectives around accessibility. But those other 90% are mostly unworkable. Typically, the code is so poorly constructed that it impacts much more than accessibility. The lack of accessibility is just a symptom of an underlying failure. In fact, I've seen that 90% of websites are so poorly implemented that they hinder access, usability, and performance in collectively unfixable ways. The only fiscally responsible way to meet these objectives is to throw out the code and many aspects of the design and content and take a new approach. An approach that leads to delivering a website that can reach and engage with the full scope of your market. Again, this lack of accessibility is just a symptom of underlying issues that are impacting the effectiveness of these troubled websites. These are issues that impact everyone, from slow loading to hard to understand language, to difficult workflows, through to broken interaction models. This is where starting with a process of delivering products and services that serve the full diversity of your market improves access for all. That's because inclusive and intersectional approaches allow you to better reach and serve the entirety of your market. Inclusivity at its most basic includes more welcoming language and imagery. Going deeper, inclusivity is about authentically engaging with the full diversity of your market in order to define products and services that deliver real value across your market. Ultimately, following the core values of usability, accessibility, and inclusivity leads to a series of benefits. You open up access to market, reduce ongoing costs, avoid alienating aspects of your market, and you grow engagement and conversions. You also reduce the risk of human rights offenses based on regional legislation, and you reduce costs on an ongoing basis. Underlying all of this, from digital excellence to inclusive design, are a series of methodologies that bring you closer to your customers, closer to your markets, your users, the people your organization serves. That's why, together, digital excellence and inclusive design help you deliver products and services that better serve the increasingly diverse markets that make up your customer base. So let's get back to the all-important question. Are markets actually diverse? A great place to start is with the myth of the average person. There's a commonly held tenet that by designing for the average person, we can serve 80% of the market. That we need to focus on the average and avoid the edge cases for efficiency and scale. Well, why is this a fallacy? Simply put, there is no average person. So where did this idea come from? In the 1840s, mathematician Adolphe Quetelet wanted to define the average man in terms of body proportions, height, and weight. To calculate these proportions, he measured as many people as possible in order to gather data on a range of different body characteristics. The result was the Quetelet index, or what we effectively know today as the body mass index, BMI. BMI has had several issues identified by the medical community, including its lack of basis in genuine physiology and variance. Ultimately, defining the average man was based on flawed physiological studies. To then use these studies and Quetelet's findings as the basis for making product and service decisions that impact markets and behavior is nonsensical. Think of yourself, how your body feels right now, your moods, your day-to-day activities, when you commute, when you're at home, when you're out with friends or visiting family. There's so much nuance to who we are and how we engage with the world and even with ourselves. When you consider all of this nuance and possibility, how can you define a you, an archetype, with fixed characteristics that explains who you are? We surely can't define archetypes that cover a wide range of us, when with all of this change within even ourselves, we can't even describe an archetype of ourselves. Let's not even focus on who you feel you are, but how you engage with the world. When you're at home versus on the go, you have different modes of engagement, different ways of interacting. Thinking just digitally, you may be on your phone while you commute, using a smartwatch at the gym, an iPad at home, a computer at work. All devices that you engage with differently or expect different things from based on your current environment and the context of use. From a physical point of view, do you wear glasses? What if you don't have them on, don't want to put them on? What if you're watching a video and can't put the sound on because of where you are or who's around you? What if you sprain your wrist tomorrow or break a leg? How does all of this impact you? Here's Microsoft's inclusive design persona spectrum, highlighting different states of being. This image highlights that across touch, sight, hearing, and speaking, every one of us can have permanent, temporary, or situational changes in ability. With touch, a series of related examples would be a person who only has one arm, while someone may temporarily have an arm injury. And a situational example would be a parent holding a baby. With hearing, a person may be deaf, while someone may have a temporary ear infection. And another person may be in a loud environment. Someone may be blind, while another person may have cataracts, and another person may be a distracted driver who would hopefully be quick to focus their attention on the road ahead. The last of the related examples on Microsoft's inclusive design persona spectrum relates to speaking. In this case, someone may be nonverbal permanently, while someone else may temporarily have laryngitis, and situationally, someone may have a heavy accent. There are many other related examples of how touch, hearing, sight, and speaking can differ across people permanently, temporarily, and situationally. It's understanding and designing with these variables in mind that helps us deliver products and services for everyone. We need to move beyond the average, beyond the archetype, and work toward understanding all the nuances of individuals. This approach is a shift from commonly employed design and marketing processes, suggesting that we do away with archetypes and personas. But it's an approach that offers so much more opportunity than making product and service decisions based on a flawed methodology. Embracing fluidity, intersectionality, and a diversity of market, that's the only way we can effectively serve the whole market. And that's because the people who use your products and services are all unique individuals with different goals and needs. And this is where intersectional approaches to delivering products and services come in. Intersectionality is a way of thinking through how factors of identity, such as gender, race, sexuality, class, and more, interact with one another and form a clearer picture of who someone is. There are so many identities, circumstances, and fluid behaviors that influence your customers on a moment-to-moment and on a longer-term basis. In understanding how these factors combine, we can more deeply understand an individual customer's priorities and context of use. An intersectional approach considers long-term factors such as identities like race or gender, temporary changes in ability or situation, and moment-to-moment shifts in factors like environment or mood. It's better to think about your market and the factors that influence your market as complex and fluid, changing day to day, moment to moment. Thinking about the people that use your products and services in an intersectional way can be a guide for understanding how all of these factors link together and influence each other. As Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality, recently said, intersectionality is not just an abstract idea. It's a way of seeing and engaging. There are three primary categories of intersectional factors that can help you see and engage with the people who make up your market. They are identity, circumstances, and behavior and environment. These three primary categories and related factors come together to form someone's behaviors and experiences in the world and in using your product or service. Factors that relate to a person's identity can include socioeconomic status, gender, culture, race, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, and worldview. Factors that relate to a person's circumstances or situation, those can include geography, living situation, language, and ability, which can include motor skills, vision, learning, attention, and many other factors. And factors that might relate to a person's behavior or environment can include mood, internet connection, the device they're using, their location, and their context of use, what their current use case or job to be done may be. Making strategy and design decisions with intersectionality at the forefront will guide your team in identifying stronger product and service requirements by understanding the very individual natures of who each of your customers is. This awareness can guide your team in developing more appropriate, individualized product specs and design requirements, tailoring content to be inclusive and resonate with all the diverse groups who use your product or service. And identifying and tapping into new markets that have behaviors, goals, and needs that match with your product or service offerings. By understanding how all of these factors mix and interact to form the experiences of your users, you can design your products and services in a much more intentional way. Once you establish standards and processes based on intersectionality, your product or service will be able to meet the goals and expectations of your market across different circumstances, contexts, and environments, and to embrace their unique identity. This effectiveness is all driven by an understanding and advocacy for the diverse, unique individuals in your market, and delivering products and services that can be used and loved by more people while improving the experience for your existing users. Now, influencing all of this is our relationships as organizations, designers, researchers, and decision makers. How we engage with customers considerate of these intersectional factors, and how we shape and deliver products and services for the myriad individuals who make up our customer base. It's in our engagements with people and the product and service decisions that we make that we both influence markets and either deliver value to or take from people. And understanding this power dynamic based on recognizing who we are as individuals and in the roles we play at work, considerate of the intersectional factors of the individuals from across the markets we serve, offers insight into how our work can impact people. Now, let's consider a relatable example of how intersectional factors may influence your day-to-day. Consider your shifting needs while at home, at work, with family. If you're planning a grocery shop, a trip, or trying to pay a bill, your needs change when you're opening a website on your phone, while at a store, commuting, or when you're at a desk. How you perceive, engage, or react to a product, service, a call, or conversation can change based on your mood, your expectations, your past experiences, where you are in that moment, and even how your day is going. Identity, circumstances, behavior, and environment push us all in different directions every day. Each person in your market embodies all of this nuance as individuals, and every market is made up of myriad diverse individuals. It's up to us to follow practices that better serve them. This is why it's actually best to avoid personas when developing products and services. Let's explore this in more detail. So, what are some of the pros and cons of personas? Since personas generalize a group of people into one representative person, they can give your team an overview of a target customer or a group of customers. They also outline high-level assumptions about your customers' preferences and their behavior patterns. However, if your team's aim is to understand what your users need, personas aren't the most effective tool. Personas alone don't reveal all of the moment-to-moment individual factors that influence people's needs, and are typically not focused on information that reflects behaviors that affect the use of a product or service. Essentially, personas are great for humanizing customers by painting a picture of individual experiences within a larger group. This increased empathy for your users is a lot easier to foster when you have a document that details pain points and experiences. Personas are one way of doing this, as they allow you to create a representative person for your team to consider and advocate for during product and service decision making. However, you shouldn't rely on them to define what larger demographic or affinity groups, especially diverse ones, might want. And they aren't what you should use as the only source of truth for product and service decisions. Without a persona, you're still going to need a way to understand your customer and document it for your decision-making processes. Where personas and marketing conversations often focus on demographics, product and service decision-making is better supported by understanding behavior and need. The issue with the concept of edge cases as market, audience, or customer segmentation is that you miss out on the key quality of engagement that impacts your products or services, and that's behavior. As Joe Landman has shared, people aren't edge cases, tasks are. This goes to the heart of reframing how you consider the users of your products and services. Now, you don't need to scrap your existing personas, but instead, redefine how you think about your users and how they might think and behave. By switching from categorizing users to thinking about their behaviors, tasks, and goals, you'll have a much more accurate understanding of how users might use and benefit from your product and service offerings. One way that you can refactor personas or archetypes is to create states and contexts maps, which pair archetypes with details about the ways their circumstances and needs might affect their use of a product or service. Let's walk through some examples of states and contexts you might identify with. Some examples of user states could include distraction and attention level, cognitive needs, needing content in a specific format, for example, audio or visual. Anything that involves individual factors and attributes like someone's 5 senses or cognitive state could be a factor in your user states. Some examples of user contexts could include the device that's being used, internet connection, where a person is using a product or service, getting back to that idea of environment. Here's an example of how all these states and contexts weave together to form a complex series of interconnected considerations that can be subtly different for each person you identify as a customer. Now, the most important takeaway here is none of these factors are exclusive to one particular market segment. And the people who fall into each state or context are always changing. Now, I didn't describe the image that's on screen because it is just mapping these factors in ways that help you understand social, sensory, dexterity, cognitive, communication, temporal, learning, device, and internet access lenses. So they're all there, and the key is that concept that each person who is engaging with your product or service will have different access to those factors or different engagement with those factors. So by mapping these states and contexts, you can then begin to segment by behavior and need to best understand how to deliver an improved product and service based on providing increasing value to customers. Through this type of context and state mapping, you can highlight common patterns and blockers of behavior and adjust your product and service strategy towards impacting those in service of your customer segments. Then you can layer in intersectional considerations. It's with this combination that covers states and contexts, related segments, patterns and blockers of behavior, and intersectional factors that you'll have an immensely rich series of considerations to design for. A set of considerations that go much deeper than traditional personas in ensuring you can better serve increasingly diverse markets.
Going to post questions in the Q&A. Our speakers are there to answer them. And we're also actually going to be sharing a feedback form in the Zoom chat. Claudia's going to send that your way, and that's just for you to share any feedback you have, whether that's for the speakers today or just for the general conference format and you want to share those ideas with us. That'll be available to you. So enjoy the break, and in 10 minutes we'll be back. Thanks, everybody. This talk is about 22 minutes, and it is by Rachael and Urška. Their talk's titled Curating Psychological Safety Through the Stages of Your User Research. And we're just going to get right into it. So enjoy.
On a project that I'm going to be talking about today, I was a researcher working with key workers during COVID-19. And
I'm Rachael. I'm a user researcher, and the project that I'll be talking about today, I was working with women who have been receiving misogynistic abuse on Twitter.
We are working for a studio called Paper. We are a research and design studio based in Sheffield. We are currently in our spaces, which is a bit of a nice difference than from working from home. And we are making sure that through all the work that we're doing, we're always putting our users first. That is our priority, and we make sure that no one is left behind.
So how we got here, before we go into the main bulk of our talk, just want to explain how we learned so much about psychological safety. We didn't follow a set method. We didn't follow a framework for doing this. What we did was try and educate ourselves, ask questions, think critically about the work that we're doing, share our thought processes, what was working, what wasn't, with each other and with other people doing similar roles. So the things that we're going to talk through today is just some of the things that we've learned. There'll be things missing, there'll be more to learn, but it's a snapshot of where we're up to at the moment. So how it's going to work today, we will give you details about the two projects that we just mentioned, about the work we were doing, and then we'll split those into the 4 stages of doing research. And within those, we'll give you do's and don'ts to help you curate psychological safety throughout your research processes. So there's about 15 do's and don'ts in total. So what do we mean by psychological safety? So here we're really talking about just trying to create an environment where participants feel comfortable enough to express themselves and to feel comfortable doing that without any fear of consequences. So we want to create spaces where people can bring their authentic experiences and their own knowledge to those spaces and feel extremely comfortable doing that. Part of the things that we need to do to build that psychological safety is to be aware of what might be triggering for our participants and making sure that we don't intentionally do things that might cause them any harm. So why it's important in research specifically, if we don't create an environment where people feel like they can be themselves and give us their true opinions, their true experiences, their true thoughts, we're going to get back what people think we want to hear. We're going to get back what they think is the socially acceptable answer. That then has huge consequences for you designing your services, whatever it is that you're designing. You need their true experiences, true thoughts. And to do that, to start building that safety, we need to be really clear about our roles. You bring a lot more power to a situation as a researcher than a participant. So you need to be clear about what your role is, what their role is, and where the boundaries are between them. What will come of the research that they're doing, making sure that everything is very clear, laid out for them. And just to explain, we're not talking about consent today, and I'm sure some people will be wondering why. Consent is essential for building psychological safety. Informed consent tells people what they're taking part in, who's doing that research, how to remove themselves from a study if they want to, but it is its own important process. And what we are talking about today builds on top of the psychological safety you build with a thorough consent process.
So, as we said before, we're going to go through those stages that are building on top of your consent form. So we will be covering planning, recruitment, in between research session and aftercare that we how we build the psychological safety in between those. Okay. So for our talk, we are basing this on an experience from our project, and I will be talking about my experience on working on a project with schools during COVID-19. Our key participants were key workers in school that were really time poor and really overload because of the COVID constraints that were put on school. So we had to be careful about how much time we asked of them, as well as we had to justify to our client why is it crucial for us to speak to them. So we had different external constraints that we have to deal with around psychological safety of our users.
And I was conducting some research with women who have been targeted with misogynistic abuse on Twitter. So misogyny by itself is a really sensitive topic, and asking people about their experiences of it has the potential to bring out past trauma. It can be a really difficult conversation for people. And actually it was quite difficult for the researchers as well, because we're also dealing with that distressing subject quite a regular basis. And we were volunteering, so we were working on this sensitive topic alongside other projects. And just to be clear about these two projects, whilst we love working together, we were working on these projects at the same time, so therefore apart from each other. So we were trying to share our learning as it was happening. After the fact, this worked really well for me, this didn't. So that's where a lot of the knowledge has come from today.
Yes, and we always love that, to exchange what we have used or what we have tried out, to learn from each other and also do stuff like that and share it with other people. So now we're going into planning in the first stage. So in planning, your goal should be to combine the needs of your project with the constraints with project which protect your participants. So in that, I'm talking about, do put your participants' needs before your own. So we were thinking in the sense of, we were working remote. So the methods that we could use for our research were limited, but also in the sense of what are we using to speak to our users? Because schools have a lot of logs on different programs that we can use to communicate. We were really making sure that we're using the programs that are accessible for schools so that they don't have to struggle and look into if they can download the extra apps. And we had to think about those things at the start in our planning, where we had to introduce that to our client of how are we gonna make sure that we are not burdening people even more than they already are.
On my project, one of the things that we were really focused on was making sure we weren't asking for more information than we needed. We were asking people to relive past traumas, talk us through experiences of being abused, and the consequences of that. We wanted to be really clear that if we didn't know how we were going to use that information, that we didn't ask them to relive it, just so that we could maybe learn something that might be helpful.
The next don't plan for more time than your participant can offer. As I mentioned, my participants were really time poor. So we were thinking about in our planning, how much time it's sensible to ask of them, as well as when we can ask of that time. So we were thinking either before their working hours or after. So we extended the time that they can book in, as well as like what is the appropriate time that we can ask of them. So we decided on 45 minutes on that. We did that in planning session because we had to go back to our client, introduce them our ways of how we're going to protect and make sure that the participants are not burdened even more than they already have on. Next one is recruitment. In recruitment, our main goal is to recruit people mindfully. And we did so by
one of the things we did was making sure participants are aware of who will be doing the research. So I think this is the only time we'll talk about consent again, is you always need to say who is doing the research, who they're doing it on behalf of for our project, because misogyny is generally directed at women from men. We wanted to be really clear that there was a male researcher on our team, and we made it very clear how people could opt out of having that male researcher conduct their session, no matter what time they wanted, what time they were free. We would make sure a female researcher would be able to do it instead. And again, being really clear about what topic you want to talk about and why you want to talk about it. I mean, technically, again, this is informed consent, but on top of how you'd normally say, you're always trying to find the balance, aren't you, between enough information that somebody is informed about why they're taking part, not so much information that might potentially bias them before they arrive at your session. But we were very clear. We were talking about misogynistic abuse on Twitter, how we were going to use that, giving people all the information they needed to decide whether they felt okay coming to talk to somebody about the topic.
And another do is you look into who you are trying to reach out and how much they already have on. So in the process of recruitment, what we have done is every time we were thinking of contacting the school, we checked on their school, we did some desk research, and we checked on their school webpage if how much they have on, what are the informations that they are providing, are they having any alarming notifications that they're really busy or constrained, that kind of helped us indicate if that school is very busy and we're not going to contact them at that point of time, or if they could potentially be a candidate that we can reach out to and ask for the specific people that we wanted to talk to with. And another one, do create a criteria of what is worth people's time and what would be burdensome. We were lucky enough that our client was really keen to talk to us, and also not just to us, but also to learn a lot about our participants. But obviously, because we were time poor with our time that we have available with them, and we had our project plan and research goals, we were really strict with our client of what we can and can't get out of the session, as well as making sure that they are aware why. So making sure like how much time we have and what we already have to talk to with our participants, as well as making sure that our participants know that this is the exact subject that we're going to speak about. Our favorite, in between user research session. So in between user research session, your main goal around psychological safety should be assessing that our participants' state of mind before and after in the session. And we do that during the session. What we have done is the first thing what we do in our session is to do check-in, to start the session and ask them how are they feeling. So in our session that worked really well because it allowed participants, some of them even for the first time, to just think about how are they and how are they feeling. There's not a lot of people that asked about how are you today. As well, we always make sure that we give them an option. So if you would mind, I would like to check in with you. So we never forced a check-in on them and always allow them to have an option. But everyone in our session was really happy that we actually took a time and asked them. And of course, from research perspective, that gave us a good option to check in, how are they, if they were really stressed out, or if they were talking about all the different things that they have to do, so a bit frazzled with all the different thinking. We might said like, I think you have enough already. What if we reschedule and you have just this hour for yourself and do something that you would not have time to do?
One of the don'ts is making sure you don't phrase question in a way which may make someone feel like a victim. It's in the same way, I guess, that you would make sure you weren't asking somebody a question that was full of assumptions, that was full of bias. Make sure you do the same so that you don't have a pitying tone of voice that would lead somebody to feel like they should tell you how hard it was, how upset they were about it, rather than being able to tell you actually how they felt about it. And you start doing this by just constantly critiquing yourself, writing a question, say it out loud to someone else, see how it sounds, and just keeping that process, just keep iterating until you get to a nice neutral question about an experience.
And of course, as well, when we check in, we also do checkouts. So at the end of the session, we always checked out with our participants. Again, we took time to just see how are they, and that goes back to our goal to always assess how are we leaving our participants after a session, to make sure that their mind is in a good state. And that worked again really well with us, not just for the sake of them having a moment for themselves, but because we were talking about a subject that is quite can be quite frustrating work that they have to do. It was a good opportunity for them to just like a bit vent out about certain things that were really hard for them, and that was basically just a good indication that we are leaving them in an okay state, and give them a bit of a time, and also give a bit of a feedback on our session to see that they actually got something out of it as well, not just we.
And do make sure you have a list of organisations which could offer support. So we're based in the UK. For all of our projects, we tend to have contact details about Samaritans or Mind on hand in case somebody needs a bit of extra support. For a project like this, we wanted to make sure that it was much more specific to the kind of situations our participants were facing. So we did a lot of desk research about organisations that were supporting people who were receiving online abuse, and particularly those who were supporting women who were receiving online abuse regularly. And whenever we checked out with people, so we did the same process, and no matter how they checked out, we said, and I do have this list, if you would like to see it, I'm more than happy to share it with you, and we could share it instantly with them.
Another one, do feedback to your client about how they can support users. So that is one for when you're finished with your sessions. And we were working with quite a big client, and the participants are participants working in a role that was quite new to schools. And therefore, it was really good that we could feedback to our clients about their workload, how long they spend on certain things, how time poor they are, to kind of help not just the subject that we were talking about with our participants, but also in general to just improve their situation and help them. That is a little something that we feel like we can return based on them taking their time out to speak to us. Aftercare, that is you.
Yeah. So this is where we're going to talk about, you finish this research, you finish your sessions with your participant. What we're talking about now is the people who conducted that research and the people that observed it as well. And your goal here is that your researchers feel supported and that they feel safe once they've completed these sessions.
So the first one is ask if they are able to facilitate more sessions at the end of each one. So it's a paper policy that user research is a team sport. So we do never have only one researcher working on any kind of project that is run by paper. Therefore, we always have an ability to switch between facilitation and observers. So if I would be facilitating one session, the next session would be facilitated by Rachael, and so on, so that we have a session of a break in between our facilitation. But also, no matter what, we always check in. Are you okay? Do you feel fine to facilitate this session? It should never feel like I need to do this. And if you don't feel like you are not in a state to facilitate the session, it's really important that you feel that you can say, I can't do this, and there's no explanation needed for that. It is you coming first. And if you can't and you don't feel okay to facilitate the session, it's better if you don't.
And do ask questions about how your team are going to look after themselves. Now, no matter what the project is, you should be making sure your team is happy and that they're healthy and that they're feeling okay. For this particular project, a lot of us found it had a much bigger impact on us than we were expecting. We were taking a lot from those research sessions, we were carrying it with them. So again, we were checking out at the end of each session with the other researcher on the project, and we'd make sure we'd ask ourselves at the end of the day, how are you feeling? What are you going to do tonight to try and take your mind off this? Do you have a self-care plan? What are you going to do off that? Making sure we had activities that would distract our brains from all of the information, the darkness that we had heard about the world that day, that we'd be able to enjoy an evening by ourselves.
And also, don't leave sessions without the briefing as a facilitator and observers in the team. It's one of my policies. If you are observing and facilitating sessions, a user research session that I lead on, it means that you will have another half an hour after the session to debrief. So we all stay on the call and we chat not just about what we have saw in the session and what are the key finds that we observed or see or heard from the session, but also to see how the observers and the facilitators feeling about the session. If it was something that can be triggering for them, or if they have spotted something that make them feel uncomfortable. So it's both ways, not to just get the key insights or the insights that they have spotted first, but also to check in with them if they are feeling okay after the session was done. And recap, this is all. This is the 4 stages. So I know Rachael mentioned it was 15 stages of 15 do's and don'ts. So what we want for you to take from our sessions are these 3 key questions. So when you're doing or responsible of user research on a project, if you're thinking about psychological safety of your users and yourselves, we want you to think about these 3 questions. The first one is, how am I going to protect my participants and myself? The second one is, how can I make sure I don't burden people when they take part in the research? And third one is, how I will ensure that I'm not leaving anyone in a worse state than when they arrive to the session. This is the 3 key elements we want you to take away from our chat today. And of course, it doesn't matter how you get there, it matters how you do it. Nothing is perfect. It will never be. And what I love about this is, as we said, it's 2 different projects, and that we always check in with each other and see what methodology we use, and we build on that. This is our current thing that we will be doing on the projects, but it doesn't mean that as soon as we will be on the next project, we will build up on that. And that is what this is. You need to try something and assess, have a critical thinking, talk to each other, talk to other people that might be working in these realms, and build on that. And it matters that you do it, and it doesn't matter how you get there. As well as researcher well-beings matter. We matter. As Rachael mentioned, you always take a part of user research sessions with you back home, and it can be a lot. We have our own personal lives, and then on top of that, we might take on parts of our research session, things that had happened to our participants, and that's why we need to be mindful of ourselves and our well-being as well. And my favorite quote, if you cannot take care of yourself, you will not be able to look after your participants. It is important to take care of yourself as well. That's all from us. Hopefully you enjoyed our talk.
Thank you for listening.
And now we're at the Q&A portion. So how this is going to work is I'm going to hand it off to each speaker one at a time, and they're gonna pick out what questions from the Q&A that they wanted to be able to speak to kind of in a live answer. So we're just going to go in order of the way the talks ran today. So Garima, you're up first. Is there a certain question that you'd like to kind of speak to right now? And sorry, one other thing for all our speakers, if you could just read whatever question you're going to respond to before you answer, that just helps keep everybody on the same page.
All right. I think I really liked, gosh, where did that question go? If I could find it. Okay. So the question is from Jane, and it says, I'm especially interested in how you are mitigating hierarchies as a researcher and facilitator when you still lead the research questions and meeting agenda. If you've read more about this or have specific ideas, I would be so curious to hear them. I think this one is a really great question because I think thinking about creating spaces that are non-hierarchical or creating research processes in general that are non-hierarchical, can we still have sort of the not the authority, but the control over what types of questions are being asked, and generally the research trajectory and how we're creating the process in general. And just to reiterate what I already wrote, I think it's really important to have people with lived experiences as a part of the process of planning the research, because I think a lot of the times we think about co-designers as kind of our participants almost. Well, yes, we are designing together, but they are still relegated to that second phase of the research. Whereas what happens when we bring them in the planning phase, where we actually get to determine the types of questions that we're asking and what the research trajectory actually looks like, and who who are the people that are actually facilitating and leading some of those conversations. Because I think coming from a trauma-informed perspective, it's who is actually there leading the conversation, who is actually asking those questions. As designers, I think it's hard to relate to people. We are always external. We are a lot of the times outsiders coming into a space. So can we designate someone who can lead those conversations that belong to that space and those groups that we are involving in our research? I think that's that inevitably ends up kind of distributing power and breaking down those hierarchies that we sometimes perpetuate as designers. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Great question, Jane, and great answer, Garima. Okay, maybe I'll pass it off to Lee now. Would you like to share a question and answer for your topic?
Absolutely. There's a question from Angie that is great and maybe difficult to answer, but I'll take a stab at it because we just recently had this happen. And Angie asked about different ways to talk to stakeholders about using behavior needs-based segmentation rather than personas. We had a project recently where we were going through the process of better understanding who the users of the product were and starting to kind of find those patterns of behavior and segmentation. And at each step of the process, as we started to reveal this information, and we were bringing the client in even through the synthesis to start to find this. And people, especially who weren't involved in that synthesis work and looking at the research, would come to the table and say, okay, but what's the, essentially they weren't using these words, but what's the demographic segmentation? Is this group all 50 plus? Are these all, parents? Those kinds of questions come into play because people are thinking, and I think this came out of something that was in some of the other conversation that was happening in the chat, was that there's a need on the marketing side often to have segmentation that fits the advertising models out there, which say that it's about age, it's about location, it's about very clear demographic information that doesn't necessarily impact who someone is or how they're going to engage with a product or service. And so the initial argument that we would have or recommendation that we would have is that that type of data doesn't impact the people using your products or service. That's for you to ascribe some generalization for other purposes, but it doesn't impact who's using your product or service or how they're going to use your product or service. So the focus on behavior is about saying, how do we ensure that we're meeting the goals and objectives of the customer because they don't think in terms of their age or their where they live as a solution to a problem that they have. And in that case, in that specific case, it was a kind of a month-long conversation of, okay, but where's the segmentation and the demographic segmentation? And what we were able to do through that process is really show how behavior impacted how they would deliver the product or service. And then also, when we looked at the behavioral buckets that we created, we were able to say, in this group, you have people of different age groups, you have people of different socioeconomic backgrounds. So they were looking for a way to simplify the behavior into something they could wrap their heads around as a type of customer. And we simply kept layering in those other considerations where they'd say, oh, okay, so this isn't just 50 plus. This isn't just people who aren't familiar with computers. It really was a broad spectrum of people. And that, I think, is the critical lens on the product and service side that marketing and advertising maybe doesn't have the capability of being that nuanced. But when we're delivering products and services, we do, and we must be that nuanced. So hopefully that answers a few questions that have been out there.
Yeah, great job, Lee. Great job. Okay, and I'm just going to keep going in a circle as we go through questions. So if you have more you want to get to, well, I think we'll have time. We've got about the next 20 minutes to just kind of go through these. So Urška and Rachael, would you guys like to pick a question you want to jump to?
Yes, I think that we're going to answer one from Simon about how this approach, how do you ensure you're making sure your participants' recruitment is diverse? It seems like this could decide into cutting edge, cutting the corners to just get anyone who's willing to volunteer their time. It's a great question. And what we have done is we have approached recruitment through different elements. So we did our own recruitment. We engaged with the recruitment agencies. So, and we also had a participant leads from the organization that was given where people already consented to be in touch. So to be in touch with us. So that's how we tried to capture a diverse group of users. It was still hard. And I don't think that we particularly succeed in that. But that's how we try to mitigate those things. Even like engaging with the recruitment agency, when we worked with them, we worked on the screeners, we asked them to be mindful about how they're approaching them, the participants, of like, what are we doing in a way of how we are approaching, to kind of ask them to use kind of similar methods so that they are not putting more burden on them. And so that's the things that we're trying to do, we try to do to reach diversity. Unfortunately, like when it comes to with the response, it wasn't that great. And that basically made us also question where is the shift in diversity? Is it that the sector is not as diverse? It was quite a small group of users. So is that problem? So we should be focusing and doing better as the services that we are providing for them to be more open and diverse, to encourage people to get into that sector? Or is on us that we are not recognizing the diversity, or that we are not able to reach those people? Still lots of questions, and we just kind of chipped away. But as a agency, unfortunately, you come in, say hello, try to help, hopefully leave the remaining team with good ways to go and do. And I know that they're doing good ways because I'm still in touch with them. So that's what we have done when it comes to trying to recruit. And definitely we like, it is a problematic thing, and we tried our best, and we did those 3 different approaches to recruitment, because yes, it's not something we would want to cut corners on. It's a new, I didn't know about that one, cut corners. New English saying for me.
Yeah, I think recruitment is always such a difficult, labor-intensive process. So it's great to hear people's lessons learned and what they've tried and what's still a challenge. Okay, Garima, I'm going to send it right back to you. You ready for another question and answer?
Yeah, I think I really liked the first couple of questions that were around, okay, I'm just going to read it out. Thank you for the responses. Can you elaborate what you mean by creating thematic arcs in visual workshops to bring in themes of comfort, care, to set the stage of dialogue? Actually, the question before that was, in this changed world where we seem to be obsessed with remote is best, would work like this be possible in an accessible way now? So I think if I'm to summarize these 2 questions, it's, how do we create a trauma-informed and inclusive way of researching with people in remote settings? And I think it definitely becomes an extra thought and an extra challenge to tackle. And Urška and Rachael, I wonder, how you've sort of managed that in your particular research as well. But I think there are just really, well, first of all, as I was thinking, consent, thoughtful and slow consent can be acquired virtually or in person. It's just, a set of dialogue that allows us to kind of be on the same page and ensure that people's feelings are considered. But also, I think really small gestures that can be embedded in virtual engagement, that even like a simple, giving space for introductions that allow people to feel comfortable and welcomed in virtual spaces can really set the stage for the entire research engagement, whether it's the whole research process or even, per workshop or per dialogue. And I mean, sometimes this works and sometimes it falls short, but I love using metaphors, bringing in, like we had done a workshop recently where we're asking people to imagine themselves coming around a table. So kind of taking on some role playing and like, okay, so imagine yourself like going to a gathering in person. What would you bring with you as an offering to the group that is here with you? Can you put yourself in that place? And we had a mirror board that we created, and the mirror board had visuals of like a bird's eye view of a table, and people could actually like drag their offering onto the table, so it becomes this like kind of tone of joy and comfort and care. And of course the conversation was steered, in all sorts of different directions after that. But I think when you start off that way, everyone's just feels at ease and feels comforted. So I think it's a good way. Just small gestures and metaphors can go a long way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super cool. That like playful, joyful piece of bringing that virtually. It's neat to hear how people are approaching that work for sure. Lee, do you have another question you'd like to chat about?
Sure. Yeah. Simon had asked a question around the idea of kind of recruiting for every variation for every project. And I think by variation, talking about how expansive and diversity do you have to be across your research practices? And you'd ask the question about every project, you could ask the question about every research project. So like overall problem you're trying to solve, and then also each kind of phase of research that you go through. And he gave some clear examples of saying, wait a minute, what if my scope is narrow, my audience is narrow. So what if I work for a small company, or I work with a small company who's trying to fix an intranet, or maybe that's only for 3 or 5 people. At that point, does recruiting across the spectrum do anything? And this is where I get back to the context and states and layering and so on of intersectional lenses, is that the first thing from my point of view is you have a customer base, you have users. So who are those users? I think the challenge that we face, which I said in the reply, in the Q&A text reply, was that we don't do a very good job of understanding that our markets and our audiences are always diverse. We look for ways to simplify that. It reduces our cognitive load as designers and researchers to say, hey, this segment encapsulates a whole bunch of people. So that makes it easier for us. But every single segment has all of these intersectional lenses that impact who each individual is within that segmentation. And so even when you're looking at a smaller group of people, they have different needs, they have different perspectives, they have different objectives. Those are nuanced, and they're nuanced even with us in a small group. But that's where, if we start from a product or service lens with behavior, there's more commonality in the behavior than there is in trying to figure out who the individual person is and kind of what makes them tick, or how you can engage with them. And so we always push to start with that behavior lens, and then start to ask the questions of, okay, now what's the distinction amongst this group? And if it is a larger product like a government service, well, you have to serve everybody. So you have a task there to be representative in your research and in the lenses that you use to design those products or services. If it's 3 to 5 people at a small business, then you've got, I guess, 2 challenges: is how much can you get to know those people, because it's very intimate, but also acknowledging that they will have different needs based on those kind of potentially temporary or permanent or situational needs, context of use, the devices they're using, all of those contexts and states. And so we use those, as a cheat sheet, where we have our intersectional factors, we have our context and states, and we look at how can we apply those to the conversations that we're having, the research that we're doing, the outcomes that we're pursuing, to make sure that we understand the nuance of even the smallest group of people, but on the larger side, then yes, we do try to be more representative of who is participating in the work.
Cool. You need to hear the tools you're using behind the scenes to do that. Okay, Urška and Rachael, what would you like to chat about?
So the next one we're going to look at is, oh, I've lost it now. Yes, to your suggestion of checking with participants how they're feeling. Oftentimes we're meeting with participants first time, most are not comfortable sharing their thoughts right away. They take time to open up and share their true feelings. I was wondering if there are any other ways, icebreaker activities we can use to gauge this understanding better. I think links back to some of the things that Garima was just talking about as well. I think where you put that check-in is quite important for your research session. We aren't kind of arriving saying, hi, this is my name, nice to meet you, your name, how are you feeling today? We're sort of doing a bit more of a casual conversation first, particularly when we're remote, making sure we remind people it's okay if life is happening behind you. We appreciate you might not be in an ideal situation. If there's pets, partners, children, we won't be bothered by that. Just if you need a minute, take a minute. And making sure we, again, explain what we'll be doing, what the session might look like, what kind of things we might ask them, what the activities will look like. Ask if they've got questions for us. And at that point, you tend to have built a little bit of a rapport, you're feeling a bit more relaxed. And that check-in is always an invitation. We never enforce it. If people aren't comfortable at that point talking to us, we would still ask if they were wanting to check out after our conversation, but there is no obligation of them to check in. If they don't want to talk about how they're feeling that day, that is absolutely fine. No judgment comes from that. But it is just an opportunity to give people a chance to talk about how they're doing, if they want to take it. And it is actually a really important tool for building that rapport. We found, particularly remote. I think when you're in like a live research session, if you're in person, you have a bit more of a, you know, do you need a pen? Do you need anything? Have you got water? You have all these moments.
Like a cuppa.
Yeah, to just have really relaxed conversations and naturally say, oh, hi, yeah, how are you? This is where we'll be today. And it's just making sure you try and find a way to replicate that when you're online, which is tricky still, even after all this time.
Yeah.
Hopefully that helps a bit.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely neat to hear like the slowness and like the investment of that upfront building rapport and the value that brings in everything that follows. Garima, you're up.
Yeah, just to add to that, I've been thinking a lot about like, you know, we're inviting people to attend these, you know, workshops and dialogue and research spaces from their home. And it's like, how do we kind of acknowledge that they are calling from their home? And, you know, again, like thinking about gestures, what are the different gestures that like kind of acknowledge that and bring their home into, I mean, I know we don't want to bring their home into our engagement space, but like it's inevitable, right? So, you know, like this question of like, can you bring something from your house to the workshop that, you know, just to start conversation or something like that. So it kind of extends that research space to wherever the other person is. And yeah, I think it takes that moment to recognize, okay, well, we are actually in other people's homes, even whether we like it or not. But I guess the last question that I can try to tackle and unpack, I think this is a big one. It says, I would like to understand how one can talk about change in societies that follow rigid social groups. For example, the caste system. I have a feeling individuals higher up in the hierarchy might feel threatened by the idea of change and inclusivity. What do you think? That's a big one. And I think that really did show up for me in the workshop that I described to you all this morning. I think that walking into a space and going in with the intention that, hey, I'm gonna make a change today. I think going from a student perspective, that was a big kind of check-in and a reminder that, I don't think that we as designers really have the authority or the capacity to do that. And I really had to, on the one hand, as I said, we as designers are agents of change. It's inevitable because of the way that we, again, cause, disrupt, shift, innovate, whatever. But to go into a space to perhaps dismantle and break down hierarchies or whatever, I think we perhaps as designers in our roles can't do that, but we can facilitate that, I think, with our peers and the people that we engage in these dialogues. So I think if we shift how we define those roles, not as change makers, but maybe facilitators of something else, facilitators of participation, if anything, perhaps that pressure is removed from us, and perhaps that power to do something is distributed or given to someone else to participate and to participate in their spaces slightly differently. I don't know if that's a convoluted answer, but that's all I have for now.
Pretty big question. So I think maybe Lee, is there anything, it's a big question, maybe we can all share answers to that. Lee, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And, so my day-to-day work at Say, we've kind of made the decision that we're going to focus on products and services and the output of a product or service as an outcome of a method of being more inclusive. So saying, who's our audience? Can we reshape our product or service for them? And I think the question was more about kind of business disruption, which shouldn't happen negatively through that process unless somebody is really stuck in their ways of being a gatekeeper to some standard that from our estimation is limiting. So for us, organizations exist to serve markets, and if you're not delivering the best product and service for the diversity of that market, that's not a healthy thing for the organization. So if somebody's feeling disrupted by change that impacts that, it should be a positive disruption. But I know as well that there are other organizations, other companies, other agencies, other people who are trying to intentionally disrupt organizations, which I think is a really interesting, or disrupt capitalism as an example, which necessitates decolonizing the systems that have existed because of colonization. So those are interesting stories to me that my day-to-day work isn't about. But I would say that if people are interested in more of that work, to look, for example, here in Toronto, OCAD-U, Ontario College of Art and Design, has been working to decolonize the university, and that they've got a lot of stories that they published on that. So that would be something of interest, thinking about the idea of disrupting organizational leadership or changing organizational leadership towards a different kind of company or organization. So yeah.
Cool. I'm realizing we're almost out of time, but Rachael, Urška, is there anything you want to add to this conversation?
It's a big topic, isn't it? Yeah, I think for me, I'll see Urška might have a different perspective. It is about, with the people who are higher up in that hierarchy, trying to take them on the journey that you are taking, not going in hard at the start, being like, I'm going to completely disrupt what we're doing and change it, and more of trying to build on let's start by understanding, let's start by trying to build some empathy about what might be happening. You have your view of what this hierarchy looks like and that it's working okay. Let's start with hearing maybe some of the stories from the other end, and trying to build the empathy and what small changes could we make, and helping people make some of those decisions and those changes for themselves, rather than us coming in as the researchers and the designers and saying, this is a change you should make, giving them the opportunity to have those light bulb moments that go, I could probably change this. This doesn't sound like it works for everybody. It's probably the way that you could do it in a more mindful way to make those changes. Yeah, I think it's really hard because
because we're quite new sector, we're working with a lot of organizations that are not the way we are used to work. So you have basically two jobs. You have to do your job as in researcher or designer, but also you have to educate your clients and bring them along, because at the end of the day, if you are in agency, you, as I said, you leave that project. And of course, you still want that project to maintain and leave. And it's only if you are helping your client to go along. And what we do is always we work with clients in client spaces. We include them, we do show and tells, like we never do just project like by ourselves, like just take it with us, go into our studios and just work it on our own. We will always be working with our client and making sure that they understand, making sure what language are they using, so that we are using inclusive language. We sometimes only have a conversation. Okay, so what if I say design, what does that mean to you? Like, what do you know about design? Have you tried it? Like, it's just that understanding that you then helps you build up on how do you actually work with people. And as I said, because we are a new sector, quite relevantly new, it is like that in every project. It's not just you doing your work in bringing the understanding of users, bringing understanding of the systems and structures and services that you're working on as your project. There is another really important job that you have to do, is bringing your client along with you, which is a whole nother topic that we can have another conference on. So I think that's where I'm going to end.
Yeah, that's great. I think this tension of like incrementally changing and bringing people along to try and lead to this bigger changes is a huge tension, and it's neat to think about what design's role is in that. But you're right. I think we have to have another conference to get into that. I really want to thank everybody, Garima, Lee, Urška, Rachael, for coming today. I want to thank all of the participants that have been watching the talk, posing great questions, helping us have this conversation. Claudia, for sure, for doing all the stuff to make this all happen. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Our first day, first talks, woo! So I'm going to be hosting the talks tomorrow. Really looking forward to that. That's going to be talk B. And that theme's really looking at our everyday activities as practitioners. Each talk is going to focus on various parts of the inclusive design process and give tips for making them accessible and inclusive. And really hope to see you guys all there. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day or night or time, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye. Thank you all.